Well, welcome to the Acrylic Portrait Painting Challenge Masterclass, lesson number 5, sculpting, shading, and skin tones in your acrylic portrait. I'm so excited you're here again. We're going to get into some shading, some skin tones. It's something that artists seem to always want to know more about and how to do correctly. And I'm excited to be able to teach you that here today. So again, thank you for joining me in the challenge. If this is your first time happening upon this channel here, or you've taken the last few lessons, either way, I'm glad you're here. And I do want to encourage you to sign up for the Portrait Painting Challenge, to register, because there are benefits for doing that. When you register at realisticacrylic.com /spring-acrylic-portrait-painting-challenge, I'll send you the welcome kit. And in the welcome kit, you'll get the complete supplies list, all the materials you need to paint with us, my recommendations for paints and brushes, canvas. Also send you the reference photo with the grid, so you will know exactly how to sketch out everything in proportion, make an accurate anatomy, likeness, make it look super realistic. You'll also get the palette layout guide, which will show you how to lay out your palettes in such a way that your paints don't get muddy. And then I'll send the masterclass lessons to you as well. So go ahead and sign up at realisticacrylic.com. The link's here on the video, also in the comments section, and we'd love to have you take part in the challenge. It's been awesome seeing the progress in our group, and I want to commend you for doing an acrylic portrait, especially if this is your first time. And if you've never painted an acrylic portrait before and you have the desire to do it and you're wondering, can I do this? Well, the question is, yes, you can. God put that desire in you. You would not be watching this video if you didn't have a desire to paint a portrait. And if you have the desire to do it, God is going to see to it that you have what you need in terms of supplies and materials, in terms of teaching, in terms of time, in terms of all the resources. If you trust in Him to provide, He will provide, and you'll be able to paint a portrait way, way better than you imagined. We've seen many of the artists taking this challenge do exactly that, and I would like to see you do it as well. All right, let me ask a blessing here on this class and on you, and then we're going to get started with our lesson. Father, I do ask a blessing on this class. I pray in the name of Jesus that you would bless this painting. Help me to be able to add the additional layers well, the nuances that are needed to make this portrait look fantastic. But more importantly, Lord, bless the people watching this class. Bless all the students, Lord. Bless and provide for them everything they need to be able to paint a portrait they can be proud of, and it would glorify and honor you. Lord, I pray you provide the materials, the time, the resources. This teaching here, of course, is provided for them. And they would be able to incorporate the knowledge they learn in these lessons and be able to apply it to their canvas confidently, methodically, and overcome any obstacles, any challenges along the way, and stick with the process and finish their portrait well. So Lord, bless the people watching this. Bless this class right now in Jesus' name. Amen. And that is true. You know, there will be challenges as you paint this portrait. I would be lying to you if I said there weren't. But as you stick with the process, as you decide ahead of time, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to overcome these challenges. It'll make you a better artist, and I think in a way it'll also make you a better person. It's going to give you more character, more strength to be able to overcome other challenges in your life as well. And I have challenges in my paintings as I paint. Not everything works out the way I had hoped, and I've been painting for over 20 years. It's just part of life. It's part of being an artist. So if you feel discouraged at any time while you're painting this portrait, reach out. Join our Facebook group. That link is sent to you when you sign up for the challenge. And you'll get encouragement. You'll get encouragement from your fellow artists. You can reach out to me as well, and I'll do my best to encourage you too. So you're not alone. I just want to let you know you're not alone. And yeah, the challenge, that's why we call this a portrait painting challenge. So you will encounter some challenges, but as you overcome, you'll be amazed at what you create. So let's get into the painting here. The first step that we want to do, and we're just going to kind of leave off from our last lesson. In the last lesson, we had added some initial values. We darkened the background. We added a kind of a tone over the whole background again. We added a little bit of a suggestion of skin tone to her face, some darker values over her eyes and eyebrows and mouth and chin and those areas. But let's add kind of a glaze to her hair, a mid-tone color for her hair. So we want to get a separation in our mind as we're doing a painting with the acrylic glazing technique of differentiating between these smaller shadowed shapes and larger shadowed shapes. I've used a metaphor in the past of nations and states. You know, when you look at a map and you see, for example, where I live in the United States, and of course we have people in Canada and Europe and all over the world doing this. But you want to see, think of it like when you've looked at a map and you see that certain shape of your nation where you live, and then you have states or provinces within that larger nation, and they occupy a certain territory. Usually the map looks kind of like, well, it's kind of rugged. There might be some straight lines, but a lot of times the boundaries for states and provinces or even nations follow rivers and mountains, and they look kind of craggy. You know, they kind of have little deviations and divots, and they're not just necessarily straight lines. So you want to look at your portrait in the same way. You have this larger area of her hair, for example. That's, let's call this area here the nation, okay? And that's this larger pocket of value. It's much darker than her face. But then within this context, within this larger area here, we also have these smaller areas as well, and they occupy certain geographic, we'll just call it that, geographic territories within this larger context, this nation of her hair, just to use that metaphor. So you want to observe your reference photo, study it, and then ask yourself, where are those shifts? Where does the value shift decisively one way or another? There's going to be gradation, there's going to be some shading, but when I look at her hair, and this is why we marked it off on our reference photos when we, or I should say on our sketches, by looking at our reference photos, I see that distinction right here. I see these certain shapes. And so you want to follow those shapes, but you'll need to add more nuances in addition to what you delineated in your sketch. So always be cognizant of this idea of nations and states or provinces. And then if you want to go even further and extend that metaphor even further, think about counties, okay? Within a state of Wisconsin, for example, we've got Eau Claire County, Chippewa County, we've got Clark County, Marathon County, just a few counties in the vicinity where I live. And so think of those counties as being even smaller pockets that reside within the province or the state. And so within these larger areas, you're going to break it down to even smaller spots of nuances. I hope I haven't lost you yet. I just want to set the stage so you really kind of have this knowledge ingrained in your mind as you paint. It's going to help you a lot. But we will get into the actual painting process here. So let's work on her hair, and I want to add a tone to the whole thing. I'm looking at the reference photo, and I'm looking for that kind of mid-tone value that we find works with everything else. And I pinpoint it right about this spot. So if you look at your reference photo, study that color, study that value, and just kind of think about it in terms, is it black, is it white? It's neither, but it's somewhere in between. And we're wanting to darken this whole area of her hair in accordance with that spot there, because we find that color and that value kind of work throughout the whole thing. I want to pick a color that will work with the cooler tone on top of her hair. Okay, it's got to work within this cooler tone on top of her hair. We have something in the glazing technique where I call it preserving the luminosity. So if I use a warmer color down here, but I add it to the top when it shouldn't be there because this color is cooler, well then it's going to muddy things up. So I see that the color of her hair is warmer down here, and if you observe your reference photo you'll see that as well. It's warmer down here, but on top it's cooler because they had a cooler light shining on top of her when they photographed her. So we should pick a color that's not so warm in color that it's going to muddy this cooler area up there. Okay, so let's go with raw umber dark. But before I do that, I'm going to put down a fresh piece of aluminum foil on my palette. This is my palette system, and it's fantastic because when you get an area muddied up like I did here and it's kind of all filled with glazes, you just get a fresh piece of aluminum foil. You tuck the corners in so it's kind of rounded off, and you just press it down. Just press it down. And then with that, you can continue painting, and you don't have to, scrape off your palette, clean it off. You can just keep reusing the same colors you have there without having to waste paint. I love it. So let's do that, and we'll put down some matte medium on this fresh mixing area. And then let's take some raw umber dark with just the corner of my brush, just put a little bit on the end there, and work it into the matte medium. And again, we don't want to mix into the whole dollop of matte medium, just a little bit at a time. Swirl it around, twist it, turn it, get that paint really nice and mixed. And tap it in a little bit. Now let's take just a bit of alizarin crimson. We'll put it off to the side. Again, just the corner of the brush. Wipe it off to the side so you can really control the mixture. I have this little dollop right here. You can see that. Just off to the side. And we're going to mix this in. Just going to mix it in. We're going to use primarily raw umber dark, about 75% raw umber dark, 25% alizarin crimson. And then the whole glaze, this one could be a little, maybe just a bit more opaque. I'd say 90% matte medium, 10% paint, but still you want to go very, very light. Now we test this on the white card. Okay, this is what we've got here. It's a little bit darker than our previous glazes, but not by much. And then we're going to take this glaze and we're going to apply it over all of her hair. Well, check that, not all of her hair. There is an area that is a little warmer in tone and a little yellower, so I'm going to leave off there, but I'll show you where to stop. But let's start in the upper left corner. And we're just going to, like I say, go over the whole thing. We can exceed the boundary a little bit. That's a common mistake I see with beginning artists, and I'd like to just move you past that stage right away, is that they tend to make the hair very, very sharply defined. But the hair actually grows in a little bit randomly at the base, so you don't want to just cut it off right at the edge. You want to keep that going and let that glaze go below the hairline a bit. And we're going to just flip the brush over. We're going to use some pressure to get the paint out of our bristles and onto the canvas. So push the paintbrush into your canvas. It's good to have a nice sturdy easel for this. Okay, use some pressure, and then after you get that paint out of your brush, then you can smooth it out. Then you can smooth it out. Now I'm going very, very light at first because I want you to be able to successfully do this. And a lot of times if an artist goes too dark, it can intimidate them. So I want you to go pretty light here. And plus that's really just the right way to do this technique, just to go very, very light in the beginning. So again, covering over the whole thing. And I think I'm going to have to leave off right there. I'm going to just brush a little bit on the side of her hair and get that filled in a bit. Okay, just those little wispy strands going down on the side of her head. And then I'm also going to brush into the lower portion of her hair as well down here. So let's do that, but let's leave off on this area here except for the shadow part by her neck and this little indentation right there. This little spot right here. We're going to brush into that, but we're going to leave off in this section because in the reference photo, that is a lighter color. It's got a little yellow in it. And we don't want to put in raw umber dark and alizarin crimson, which is a little pinker, into that area. Now, the reason I chose alizarin crimson is because I observed in the reference photo that her hair does have a slightly reddish cast. It's brown, it's got a little bit of a reddish tint, and alizarin crimson is going to get that color for me. I don't want to use organic orange because that's a little too vibrant, that organic red-orange color, but the color I chose should work very well. Let's add just a little bit of this glaze, if we can, just with the corner of the brush, right on the strand of hair. Just touch it just to the edge, and we want to really integrate everything together. And actually at this point we can switch to a smaller brush. So we can just use this this flat edge brush. This is again like a 1/4 inch or 3/8 flat. Technically it's a size 6, that'll work too. And let's work on her face just a bit. So we want to take this same glaze that we've created here, raw umber dark, alizarin crimson, and let's add some additional work to the shadows on her face. So I'm just going to go over this area. We're going to paint over her eyes. The eyes look like they're a little cooler in tone, so I'm going to leave off in that area. But I will glaze over my shadows. I'm going to overlap and exceed the original area just a bit. So this is important to show. But my glaze actually goes past my original sketched delineations here. So I'm overlapping that original glaze and bringing it past that point. What that does is it begins to develop shading and nuances. It begins to develop gradation in her face. So just little by little, we're adding shading, just by the correct placement of these glazes. I'm going to continue this glaze down past her lip. I want to add a little bit of a glaze here to her nose. Just dab it if it's too dark. This little nostril implied on the other side of her nose. I'm being careful not to add it too far into the nose because we need a warmer color to get into these interior areas. Okay, these interior areas are going to be, they're going to have more vibrant pigments, so we don't want to use raw umber dark and alizarin crimson. So just for now, we're going to leave off on those areas. We're just basically going over the cooler tones and darker values of her face. We're going to add a glaze to this underside underneath her eyebrows. Inside her eyes, we're going to add a glaze as well. So let's just do that on both sides. And then also we're going to be just using the corner of the brush and going on top of these eyelid folds and darkening them a little bit as well. But I do want to just suggest a little bit of shading right up above the upper eyelid fold as well. So just right above this area. And let's go on top of the eyebrows. Make sure I don't miss that. I think I got that, but let's get that again. I think that I got that in the previous lesson, so we want to darken that a bit. And then we're going to add a little more of a glaze to her lips. So right here, I'm going to darken. Now, because the lips have a pinkish color, we don't want to apply this glaze to the whole area. Okay, just right outside the parted area of her lips where they come together. That's where we want to apply this glaze. and right on the corners. And then a little bit past the line as well. And then under her lip too, we want to do that. And then we can add a little bit of a glaze right on the underside of her face. And we're going to apply that very carefully. We don't want to bring it up too high into the cheeks because, again, this color is cooler in tone and we don't want it to be, we don't want to ruin that luminosity. But we'll use some warmer colors for that part. And we're going to apply this glaze also on her neck, cutting up along the edge of her clothing and then bringing it out only about this far. Again, because these are warmer tones, we're going to wait for that and use some warmer colors to imply those areas. All right. I'm going to also use this glaze just on that shadowed part of her hair on the left-hand side, just so I don't waste it. Want to keep your palette nice and moist. Again, spray it every 15 minutes. That really helps. But this is where we're at here in this section of the lesson. We finished up adding the additional shading to her hair, you know, darkening the whole mass of her hair. And at this stage, what we want to do now is we want to darken the background a little bit. So let's do that. We're going to add a little more differentiation in value and color as well. But I'm going to add a little more of a cooler tone to the corners and then this whole side. So I'm going to take the large flat edge brush. This is a 3/4 1 inch flat, and we're going to take some raw umber dark, mix it to the other side of our matte medium here. Also with some ultramarine blue, kind of a 50-50 mix. Now, with the glazing technique, as you add more layers, you can get bolder and bolder. You can have a little more pigment mixed into each glaze. So it's just something to keep in mind. We're not going to be going this light throughout the whole process. It does get a little more bold at the end, and we get more opaque each time. That's just a general rule. There are some occasions where you do need to use a light glaze for certain spots, but that's a general rule. But let's add this glaze and let's just test out the opacity. You can see it is a little bit bolder than the previous glazes there. Raw umber dark, ultramarine blue kind of makes a nice Payne's gray or black, although it's diluted, so it looks more like Payne's gray. And we're going to apply that to the background. So let's start in this lower left corner. And I'm actually going to go over her arm this time because that arm is quite dark in value. So, but we want to brush this as quickly as we can. And we want to not bring this up too high. Okay, so we're just going to bring it up only so far. Just leave off. Might look a little streaky in certain spots. That's okay because we're going to be adding more layers. I want to add a little bit of a glaze up in here. I'm going to make this just a little more translucent. Let's add a little more matte medium to the mix. But I just want to put in a little bit of a glaze right here to block in this area. Trying to look for that little shape. There's a little shape there. It's kind of a strange triangle. And I'm just putting in that shape right there. I'll put in just a little bit of a divot below that. And then I'm going to add another glaze to the other side. We'll start in that upper left corner, work our way out towards the left. I'm going to leave off here just in this area because I can see it's a little bit lighter. So I'm just going to leave off right there on this edge to develop some gradation. So I have a little sliver right there that I didn't apply in that spot. Okay, and that gives us a little more gradation. And we're going to add more glazes and more glazes, and we'll blend this in really, really nicely. So if you end up having some streaks, not a big deal, because we're just going to keep adding more layers to it. Okay, now that this is done, the next step is to add some more differentiation to the skin tones and value structure to her face. So I'm going to, I think, pick a color that works well as a bridge between these darker values to the main skin tone. So let's add a little more matte medium here to the upper part of the palette. Let's see. We'll take this flat edge brush here. This is a size 14. It's, I believe, a little larger than 1/2 inch. 5/8, I believe. And we're going to apply these glazes just to the interior. Now I have some clear matte medium on the upper corner, and I'm going to take raw sienna as the base. I'm just going to wipe it off here, off to the side, and then just kind of mix into it, trying to keep the paint from getting muddy from any other glazes. I definitely don't want to mix it next to where I had ultramarine blue, because that would muddy it up really quickly. But here I could take a little bit of alizarin crimson that I already have from my previous mixture and just bring that in. All right, so a little bit of alizarin crimson, and I just grabbed it from that previous mixture that I did before on her hair. If it has a little bit of raw umber dark in it, no big deal. So raw sienna and alizarin crimson mixed together. And we're going to make kind of a nice warmer skin tone that we can work out of. Let's test that here on our white card. So that's what it looks like. That's a nice color. And we're going to apply that, basically leaving a highlighted portion on the middle of her face. Now it follows a certain form. And remember when I talked to you about nations and states, you want to identify that distinction. Where does that highlight occur? You're looking for a common value, and it kind of follows right in the middle. We didn't sketch it out, but it is there. But it's kind of like right in here where I'm tracing with the end of my brush. And so that's where I want to leave off on this glaze. But let's start in a darker portion of her face. So we're going to start up here in the upper left, and we're going to apply this over everything, even over her eye. We can always fix that color later. Let's just make it easy and just go right over it. And we're going to cut up along the edge of her nose. Let's apply this all the way here to this spot. And I'm just going to take my hand and just wipe away that edge of that glaze. I'm not gonna apply the glaze on this part of her eye because that's highlighted. I'm gonna apply it here using diagonal strokes. Let's not overwork it. Leave yourself a good stopping point, which would be this little shadowed area right there. And let's continue this glaze down. So we're going to cut in, we're going to paint over her ear. It's good to have a lot of paint on your brush. That makes it much easier to apply. And let's cut in all the way around right there. We're going to paint this on her back as well. And we're going to leave off just in the middle. There's a little shape there. I want to not paint all of that in. So right in kind of toward the middle, we're showing her back structure I just left off there. And then I'm going to just glaze right over her nasolabial fold, that laugh line by her nose. I'm going to paint on top of her lips and upper lip area. I'm going to get back to the nose here and just glaze in that little edge there. This little edge right here. And again, because you're going very light, and this should be very translucent, 95% medium, 5% paint, leaves you some room for correcting anything that's off. I'm going to use my brush at a slight angle and sculpt this a little more. Now let's fill this chin in right there. This is a good point where you can leave off in the middle of the shadow, and you never want to leave off. Just like when you're painting a house, you don't want to paint half the wall and then come back in and finish it when it's halfway dry. You want to finish the whole section of the wall, and then you want to start a new section. So in the same way, you don't want to leave off right in the middle of the cheek where it's so important that you have the shading and the gradation. Rather, if you have to leave off at an area where you have a natural break. It could be her hair, it could be the ear, it could be even the shadow here under her cheek. Anywhere where you'd have a natural break. You're never going to see the two lines overlapping on your glaze if it starts to get blotchy in the shadows. Where you will see it is in the highlighted areas. So try to keep everything flowing and always keep that wet edge and cover the whole area in any areas where it's very conspicuous. So what we accomplished then is we just slowly started to get a little more differentiation in the values on her face by blocking in this area here and leaving this area vacant for now. We did have one glaze on it prior to this, but by overlapping these glazes and then using a color that has a little more red in it, we're getting that differentiation in value, and that's going to look really nice. That's going to take us to another layer here where we want to darken her hair again. All right, we don't want the face skin tones to get darker than the hair. We always want to try to keep everything looking like a Polaroid photograph where it's very light and faint, but all the values have the right relationships with each other. So since in the reference photo her hair is decidedly darker than her skin tones, and then the values and the tones within her skin and her face, we want to make sure that we keep darkening her hair and don't let the face get ahead of the hair in terms of completion, in terms of value saturation. So let's take some raw umber dark, and we'll just add it to this area that we previously used for her skin tones, right on top of that area. And let's take a little bit of burnt sienna, mix those two together. So raw umber dark, a little bit of burnt sienna. And maybe just a touch more of alizarin crimson. And this would have a little bit of raw sienna in it too because we went on top of that other area. So predominantly raw umber dark, burnt sienna, a little bit of alizarin crimson and raw sienna. And we're going to do a glaze over most of her hair, but excluding the top. So I'm just going to start here. I didn't test it with my white card. I probably should have done that. but it's a little darker than I would have liked. I'm just going to roll with this though. I think it'll still work. Yeah, we can get a little bit darker with our glazes as we have, you know, the initial foundations on there. I'll kind of lightly blend into this lighter area on top, just dragging my brush across the top very slightly. I'm going to try to leave off in this triangular shape here on her hair. So we're going to leave off there, but we will add a glaze below it. And we're also going to add a glaze here on her hair below as well. Just maybe a little bit in the interior of that shape. I will just add the smallest amount on the top here just to blend it in so it's not too artificial looking. We still leave this area pretty vacant on top because that is going to be cooler in tone. All right. And if this previous glaze that you applied is dry to the touch at this point, we can use this glaze we just created and we can work into the shadows and skin tones of her face just a bit more. I'm going to take this small flat brush and I'm going to just add another layer of shading on her face. Just go over the whole thing here and develop a little bit of gradation on her forehead by bringing this glaze out just a bit. We do have some cooler tones on her forehead. They almost have a greenish cast to them, so by having a little bit of ROM or dark in here, that's going to help. I'm going to darken this area to the left of her lips a little bit more. I'm going to darken underneath this area a bit. And this little shadow here that implies her cheeks. And we'll paint over her neck just a bit more as well. And let's bring that glaze up a little bit higher. I'm going to add just a bit of raw sienna to this glaze and a bit of burnt sienna, so we can just kind of pull that in from the mixture. And then let's just let's bring this glaze out a little bit past the original point. Develop just a bit more of a nuance and some shading, so let it overlap the original glaze, but go past it just a bit. Let this overlap the original glaze and just go past it a little bit, and that's going to really develop that shading. So I'll show you right here. And then you can use your finger and just kind of dab the end of the glaze. Just dab the edge of the glaze and soften it a little bit. And we're going to do the same thing down here on her chin. So by the way, the color is this is what we have here. It's pretty similar to the other glazes we've used. So it's raw umber dark, burnt sienna, a little bit of alizarin crimson, and raw sienna. And we're going to add this glaze on her chin. And it's going to overlap that original glaze and just go past it a bit. And here I think it would be better if the glaze had a little more raw umber dark in it. So let's add just a bit more raw umber dark and go over that. Yeah, and there we go. So we're getting a little bit more separation in the values. I'm just going to dab this corner with my finger and just lift off a bit of that glaze because I want to preserve the luminosity right there at that point. And I want to take the same glaze and apply a little bit of it to the wing of her nose, under her nose. And let's pull a little bit of raw sienna into the mixture. And we'll just add a bit of this glaze to the left side of her nose and get that shading in there. And we're just going to bring it up about this far. So we're trying to create that shape that we see in the reference photo. It's very important. All right, and I'm going to also add this glaze to her ear and just warm that up a little bit. You can use a little bit of a larger brush if you'd like. But I think this one will work fine as long as you're keeping in a small area. And let's get some curvilinear strokes just to kind of sculpt that form of her cheek. And then we'll also add this glaze onto her neck area and just darken that a bit as well. And then lastly, we'll add a bit of this glaze to the interior area by her eye. I think that's all dried up from the previous layer. Add a little bit of a warmer tone in there. I find it's more helpful to add a glaze that has a little more yellow to it and then add red in later if I need to. Because it's always easier to cool something down than to warm it up. Okay, one last thing I want to do is put the color in for her lips. So let's pick something that'll be chromatically intense enough that it'll work with even the lighter areas. And I'm going to use Pyro Red Orange or Organic Orange, but it is really kind of a reddish orangish color. And we're going to mix that into some matte medium and maybe about 90% translucency. I'll show you what it looks like here on the white card. And we'll just apply that to the lips, as we don't want them to be neglected. So just a little bit of a glaze to add some warm tones in there, get a little differentiation. I'm just gonna make sure I have this on the top properly. Just apply that over the whole thing. Flip your brush over, make sure you've covered it evenly. And we can leave off there. Let's just add a tiny bit of this pinkish color to the interior of her tear duct area on her eyes. Make sure it's very, very faint. Okay, just really thin it out with some matte medium. And then just a tiny bit right on that tear duct area. And just dab it in. And that's going to add a little more life to that area. Okay. And with that, I think that brings us to the end of this lesson here. We have a lot more to do, but I think we've covered some ground. All right, and here is where we're at in this lesson at the end of it. This is what we've accomplished. We've added some additional shading to her hair, added some sculpting of the skin tones and the value structure in her face, built up some gradations and some shading. That's really going to be an excellent foundation for our last few lessons together. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for applying the techniques I'm showing you here in your portrait. I'm happy to help you. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment below in this video. You can get a hold of me in the Facebook group as well. But again, kudos to you for doing this challenge, for continuing in this process. In our last few lessons together, we're going to bring this painting home, and you're going to really see it materializing and things coming together. So thank you so much. Like and subscribe. Go to realisticacrylic.com and join the challenge if you haven't already. It's not too late to join. Love to have you take part. And I'll see you in the next video. God bless. We'll talk to you soon.